Hello and welcome to this Thursday's morning market briefing. We've got lots to talk about, but firstly, House Republicans select Steve Scalise as nominee for House Speaker, as well as that Israel announces a national unity government as the siege in Gaza tightens and impending kind of ground invasion kind of exists and is worried for. As well as that, we've got lots to talk about on the economic calendar and lots is happening on the charts, but we'll come to both those two things near the end. Lots is happening with like US indices as well as gold and oil, and we'll analyze that on the charts near the end, so make sure you stay around till you see that. But firstly, to talk about, of course, is the House Republicans with Steve Scalise. Might be pronouncing that wrong, but he narrowly won the Republican nomination to serve as the next House Speaker, and this comes as the party races to determine who will lead the lower chamber of Congress and address pressing issues on the US's domestic policy as well as international agendas. Because as we know, following Kevin McCarthy's ousting from House Speaker, they can't actually run any of their policy agendas. They can't pass any policy. So basically, Congress is paralysed, especially the House is paralysed until they're able to get a new House Speaker. So actually getting this Speaker, in and onboarded is very important, and it needs to be done very fast. Now, Scalise bested Jim Jordan in a vote among House Republicans yesterday, with the final tally being 113 to 99. So a victory by Scalise, but not too of a majority really, not too strong of a win. It's a win nonetheless, but now the question I guess will be how many people from the more rebellious, more far right, more Trumpist kind of side of his party can he convert over to his side to work with the Democrats maybe and achieve policy solutions that the US is currently looking for. Now, Scalise said his first act as Speaker would be to pass a resolution in support of Israel in its fight against Hamas. And we'll talk about this more in our second article to talk about. However, essentially, as we've spoken about a lot for the past 3 days, Israel has been engaged in this conflict, the long-running conflict between the Israeli communities as well as, the Palestinian communities within that area around Jerusalem and the areas surrounding it, commonly known as Israel, and it's kind of the issues around that area and the borders at the moment with Gaza, which were stormed over by Hamas and massacred numerous kind of Jewish individuals, but we'll come to that more in the second article. But essentially what he's talking about here is providing extra support for them, which we've heard a lot in the past 3 days about that, with US ammunition arriving just yesterday to support Israel. Now, to win, obviously he'll need to have he'll need to also win, the following Republican vote, and Scalise will now have to face a vote by the full House. However, it is unclear when it would take place. Now, to win, Scalise would need to win over Republicans that supported Jordan. So this was kind of, Jim Jordan was his opposition candidate, against him in the run-up for, becoming House Republican Speaker. And he was more so considered on the Trumpist far right side. So it'll be interesting to see how he's able to bring over Jim Jordan's supporters to his side to possibly win this vote in the House. Now, to win, certain Republicans have already come out against voting for Scalise, with some stating that Scalise still lacks a viable alternative to passing the typical massive end-of-year spending bill. And this is really what led the kind of rebellion within the Republican Party around, Kevin McCarthy, as he kind of, the one he ended up agreeing on, the budget that he did end up agreeing on was one which kind of favoured the Democrats arguably a lot more than the Republicans, especially what the Republicans were demanding, and therefore, a lot of the more Trumpist Republicans kind of saw this more as a betrayal of the Republican establishment, and so ousted him on a crazy kind of unseen, well, not unseen, but rarely seen kind of tool that Congress holds to oust their own House Speaker. Now, although certain Republicans, have already come out voting against voting for Scalise, some have actually switched sides and said they will vote for him, and that they just want unity essentially. But all of this, does come after eight Republican rebel members led an unprecedented revolt against Kevin McCarthy last week, which is just what I talked about, with one already confirming support for Scalise. So it's not like the Republican rebellion is still just as strong as it was before. It does seem that after they've got out Kevin McCarthy, certain members are now starting to move over to Scalise's side and just look for unity in the times of distress, especially in relation to foreign policy. Now, Republicans are hoping to avoid a replay of events in January, when it did take 15 rounds of voting for the party to elect Kevin McCarthy as Speaker. And obviously, the Republican Party want to avoid this, especially any signs of weakness surely won't be good going into next year's presidential election. And just having the ability to pass policy, basically do your job in Congress, is obviously very important to voters. So I'm sure, politicians will try and achieve that. Now, with the current disarray in the House within the House, not being able, not having a House Speaker does restrict the House from making policy, therefore putting it at standstill and paralysing them, with House members being unable to pass legislation, and also at the same time needing to pass a spending bill by November 17th of this year to avoid the disastrous government shutdown, which Kevin McCarthy avoided only by passing the short-term spending bill, which favoured the Democrats more and led to him being kicked out. So it's going to be a really tough job for Scalise to try and manage, and Scalise has pitched himself as a conservative who can put coalitions together, and that will be very much required at the moment. There's lots of polarisation, issues over policies, even foreign policy issues such as Ukraine are becoming heavily politicised, and so it's really going to be his job to try and unite them, but at the same time he needs to kind of represent himself as that conservative to make sure he's still winning over the more Trumpist side of the party, and it's also he is also more seen as a likely candidate to support aid to Ukraine, so arguably more of a moderate within the Republican Party. So it would be interesting to see whether he can pass and become House Speaker in the next election. In the election for House Speaker, which engages all of the House. But that's all for the Speaker of the House. Next to talk about really is Israel, which we have spoken about a lot recently, but obviously it's maintaining is very impactful status in the news. So Israel has formed an emergency war cabinet and unity government, and this comes as the tightening of the siege in the Gaza Strip, with the likely ground offensive soon to take place, and Benjamin Netanyahu struck the deal on Wednesday with Benny Gantz, which is the head of the centre-right opposition party called National Unity Party, and we've been talking about obviously the siege since it began, with this constantly ramping up, seemingly constantly escalating, more and more nations kind of pulling themselves in somehow, and it's obviously a very bloody conflict so far. Many civilians have died, and with any impending ground invasion of a highly dense kind of city area like Gaza is, obviously that's going to bring with it lots more civilian casualties as well. So kind of establishing this national unity government is a way that Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to establish, kind of stability in the times of crisis. We generally see this across most governments during times of conflict. However, it does seem very important to him right now to, help solve this issue and have, a consensus across all parties and avoid politicization within the nation, where, so many people are already mobilized and ready to fight for this cause. And this came following, as we've spoken about a lot, Gaza's deadly attack, and the power as a result has gone out in Gaza. They've cut off the power, they've cut off any imports into Gaza, and they've cut off the water supply in Gaza in a way to, try and get the civilians to leave through to Egypt, where there's current issues because Egypt don't want to take in, the kind of displaced civilians, and as well as that, the kind of the removal of power prevents Hamas from utilizing certain energy sources for its ability to defend itself when the ground invasion does likely begin. Now, this emergency government would serve for the duration of the war with no legislation proceeding that doesn't concern the war. So this is quite significant, to be honest, especially if we then consider this as a conflict which is likely to take some time to end, considering the fact that we still haven't seen the ground invasion of the Gaza Strip, and surely that invasion is going to be costly and take certain periods of time to complete. With the underground tunnel networks that Hamas has built over the years under Gaza, as well as just the massive urban density of the Gaza Strip, does make it a very tough place to infiltrate and fully clear and make safe once again. So if this is going to restrict any new policy from being passed that isn't in relation to the war, then obviously it's going to have detrimental effects, possibly on even the civilian populations of Israel, which aren't able to, kind of progress as a society until this war ends. Now, this government will also include the Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, which is from the same party as Netanyahu. So it's kind of a split between the two parties. And this deal will also put on hold, the controversial judicial overhaul, which triggered deep divisions in the military. And we know after this invasion did take place, this kind of protest against the judicial reforms did kind of cease. The strikes against it did cease, with army officers and army individuals going back to the forces to make sure that their nation was defended, and so kind of putting this large issue which is still in Israeli politics on hold and kind of pushing it to the side, in some ways is massively benefiting Netanyahu, which was having large issues around that, and so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in relation to the duration of the war, whether by the end of this war it might have been forgotten with larger issues now at play, and therefore Netanyahu's kind of got away with it. Now the deal includes 5 members, this being the coalition deal. This deal includes 5 members of the opposition party, joining the cabinet, as well as the deal is kind of this attempt to get over the divide within Israeli politics ahead of what is expected to be a long and tough military campaign. And this obviously will hurt many people on many sides of the conflict, and have detrimental effects for Israel's economy, social kind of sphere, and for just the wider populations around Israel as well, and the Palestinians inside. Now, according to the Biden, this all comes after Israel mobilized 360,000 reservists, and this is in addition to the active duty forces, as they kind of prepare for this ground invasion of Gaza. So lots of forces have been accumulated, which kind of hints to a more escalated conflict, I guess, rather than this just being a small counter-terrorism operation, this does seem to be a significant time of war for Israel. Now, Israel cut the electricity, fuel and water supply in the lead up to the operation, killing the main supply of Gaza, as we spoke about, trying to kind of squeeze out any civilians, pushing civilians out of Gaza, restricting kind of the ability to cause civilian casualties as collateral damage, and allowing the Israeli military to kind of distinguish military targets a lot greater, as well as that kind of cutting the power supply, as I said, will make it harder for kind of the Gaza's militants, so Hamas, to kind of stage out and live and continue to operate within Gaza. And according to the Biden administration, discussions were taking place with Israel and Egypt about creating a safe passage corridor for civilians in Gaza, with 300,000 civilians displaced. And this is, this kind of brings us back to the times of Mariupol, in Ukraine, near the start of the invasion by Russia, where, as Mariupol kind of became encircled, green corridors were opened up in a kind of an agreement between Israel and between Ukraine and Russia to allow civilians to escape areas within Mariupol, and restricting therefore the civilian casualties. That said, there were issues around the creation of those green corridors, with reportedly Russian shells being fired at those green corridors as civilians try to escape as a result of Azov militants, so Ukrainian fighters kind of being embedded within those civilians. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, because possibly it might be the same sort of situation. Now, Israel also said it had hit more than 2,600 Hamas targets in the blockaded territory, so Gaza, while more than 5,000 rockets had been fired from Gaza. So really significant numbers there. And it'll be interesting to see how much the civilian populations will have been collaterally affected as a result of these targeting of Hamas targets, because obviously it's such a dense area, military infrastructure is embedded with the civilian infrastructure, especially when you've got tunnels underground running beneath civilian and residential buildings, with entrances to these tunnels being within those residential buildings. Obviously you're making it a very tough situation and allowing for collateral damage to occur. And now the death toll in Israel has reached 1,200, and the military said the figure would continue to rise with more discoveries of bodies of civilians killed. And these are civilians being killed by Hamas after they invaded temporarily and massacred Israeli populations. Now, dozens of hostages are still reportedly held by Hamas, including US, UK, French and German citizens. So, this risks, the wider escalation of the conflict, obviously, because if you're having, so many foreign citizens being held hostage, possibly being executed, then you run the risk of, special operational forces from those nations being sent in to rescue those individuals. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out and how that might affect the market with increased volatility, with US ammunition for Israel and the US with increased US ammunition travelling to Israel as well, and in addition to the US moving a naval carrier group near to Israel, this all links to more higher tensions which are peaking between the two, between the Arab states and the Western world. But that's all for the articles. Next to talk about, of course, is the charts, where firstly we have to talk about US indices. So, as I've kind of referenced many times in relation to the invasion of Israel by Gaza, I've kind of spoken about how a lot of people were expecting a sell-off in US indices following the invasion. That's why we kind of saw this gap. But since then, we've really rallied to the upside. However, I did note this area of liquidity of resistance on the charts, where I believed it was likely that kind of price might move into and be restricted from moving higher. This is what we have seen with price moving into that area, reacting, moving down a bit, and kind of now consolidating. And this is kind of the situation we're in for US indices. We're not too sure on where US indices will go with these escalating tensions and upcoming macroeconomic data releases, which we'll talk about in just a second. But basically, we've got lots of data coming out today in reference to the US's economy, which will have great effects on US indices, such as inflation data, which obviously has a great effect on the Fed's monetary policy decisions. And so, depending on what the Fed chooses today, in addition to whatever escalations there are with the Israeli conflict, it'll be interesting to see how US indices will react, and that's what we're kind of seeing across many of the US indices. Now, next to talk about, of course, is dollar, which has consolidated almost at a double bottom, seemingly in the same way that US indices are. It's almost like these two asset classes are almost waiting for the US inflation data to be released today. But in kind of the lead up, we have seen this decline in the dollar, and it has now broken below this trend line that I marked out here, which showed the very bullish performance for the dollar, which is now broken below this previous low, which was signifying a kind of that upward momentum for the dollar. So it'll be interesting to see now whether the kind of dollar's movement, the dollar's trajectory has changed for the worse, and now it might be on the way down towards bearish territory. So definitely keep your eyes on the dollar as it kind of reaches this area of support and liquidity to kind of see whether it will go up or down. But next to talk about, of course, is pound yen, which we were kind of talking about a lot recently, especially in relation to the fact that we were like, oh, maybe it's going bearish, considering that it had broken below this channel. However, even despite breaking below it, even retesting it and continuing lower, pound yen is responding bullish in a very bullish manner, and nearly breaking above this prior trend line that was retested. So it'll be interesting to see whether this trend line can actually become one of significance once again, maybe react off it, maybe fall off it, or maybe break above even and retest it to continue higher and remain in this bullish kind of upward channel. And although we had spoken about this kind of area being a false breakout below this area of liquidity, there's quite a possibility that if pound yen breaks once again back up into this channel, that this whole area has ended up being a false breakout, with just incorrect macroeconomic signals creating this kind of market distortion. So definitely keep your eyes open in relation to pound yen, and listen out for any economic data in relation to that. But that's all for pound yen. Next to talk about really is USD JPY, which we were talking about how it was kind of forming this bullish flag yesterday, and it seemingly has broken out of this bullish flag, breaking above the bearish trend line that had formed, and using this area of support as liquidity to the upside, breaking above it. So it'd be interesting to see now whether it can continue higher, possibly after retesting the trend line, maybe bouncing off an area of liquidity such as this area, which I think is of certain significance if we're looking for areas of liquidity on the 4-hour chart. So it would be kind of responding to that 38.2% Fibonacci area. So definitely keep your eyes on USD JPY as we have that inflation data coming out today. But that's all for USD JPY. Next to talk about is Bitcoin, which we've kind of not been talking too much about too recently. Last week we did talk about some things. However, although it was on this kind of bullish trajectory, we were talking about how it's consolidating here, kind of presenting a bit of bearish signals. And since then we have seen this sell-off in Bitcoin breaking below this trend line and once again returning to this range. It'll be interesting to see whether it can break even further than that, possibly into this range over here. However, it is now reaching the oversold territory on the RSI, so possibly we will actually see maybe a bullish reaction to possibly this area of liquidity that I've outlined here that's had lots of reactions from it prior. So definitely keep your eyes on Bitcoin. Next to talk about is gold, which is in a really interesting spot. Obviously, following the invasion by Gaza into Israel, gold responded positively, acting as the safe haven asset as it is. Since then, it's kind of formed this upward bullish channel, which has been trending to the upside for some time now, and it's nearing this area of liquidity, possibly even making contact with it near the 1880 area on gold, the 18 area price level on gold, where we know there's lots of sell orders placed, as we've seen prior, acting as a short area of liquidity. And as it's kind of, on this upward trajectory, it'll be interesting to see how, gold does react to that, especially in line with the inflation data for the dollar coming out today, which we know heavily influences gold as well. But lastly, to talk about on the charts, of course, is oil, which despite gapping open and, having a really bullish reaction during, the initial stages of the invasion by Gaza into Israel. Since then, it's consolidated. I did highlight out, this kind of area which it was finding resistance at, and it since then has sold off, reaching this new area of support around this area, which I did highlight yesterday. So it'll be really interesting to see how oil kind of comes out of this. It's kind of surprising to see this, considering the kind of still heightened tensions within Israel around the conflict, but definitely keep your eye on oil in relation to that. But that's all for the charts, really. Lastly, to talk about, of course, is the economic calendar, with lots and lots of data coming out today, and very significant data as well. So firstly, we have Japanese producer price inflation. Obviously, this is very key to understanding how future GDP figures also might be, but as well as that, and more importantly, possibly how monetary policy might be shaped. So definitely keep your eyes on that. As well as that, we have Aussie inflation expectations. This obviously plays into monetary policy again, and obviously, helps shape how people price in the expected inflation figure, which is expected to be released. As well as that, we have the UK's GDP and UK balance of trade figures being released. Obviously, this is very important. Yesterday or the day before, I did highlight, the issues around the UK's economy, especially with having high inflation and lower growth. So it would definitely be interesting to see whether, the UK's GDP can actually break higher than these lower levels, kind of disprove the forecast as it has done before, and, change the way it's perceived on the international stage. As well as that, we also have new Chinese yuan loans, so some very significant data in relation, or a very significant release from China. As well as that, we also have the ECB's monetary policy meeting accounts, so definitely keep your eye on that to understand more about the ECB's monetary policy. As well as that, we also have US, and most importantly, we do have the US's inflation data. So this is really the key one. GMT time is being released at 1:30, so definitely whatever time zone you're in, be listening out for this one. It will affect near all of your asset classes that you're trading. Sorry, I don't know, it always does this. Yeah, there we are. But yeah, no, sorry about that. But inflation data from the US, it's affecting the monetary policy of the Fed. It's also affecting the US government's policy decisions. It's also affecting what the future expectations are for inflation, as well as GDP expectations. So definitely listen out for this one. It's going to be very important. We have that Fed official speech as well. But finally, we have the US monthly budget statement, which obviously has its significance. But that's all for the economic data coming out today. I hope you have a great trading day. I think we've gone over some amazing articles to talk about, lots of charts covered, and lots of economic data coming out today. Have a great trading day. That's all from us at Wildwood Capital. Have a great one. See you. Bye.